Well, greetings. Merry Christmas as we come to you on Christmas Eve of 2025. This is the Has Been podcast with your resident host, a Has Been. That's me. Anyway, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all those Yuletide greetings and all that stuff. Christmas keeps coming sooner and sooner every year. I think the older you get, the faster life goes by. And there's some truth to that. But anyway, kind of a break in the schedule for the Purdue teams that we kind of talk about and write about. Uh, First of all, I'll start with men's basketball. Since the Iowa State loss earlier this month, Purdue's won three in a row. Um, Beat Minnesota, Marquette, and Auburn, all in kind of convincing fashion. Although the Minnesota game first half was a slow starter, but then it took off after that. Marquette won with relative ease. Not the same kind of Marquette program that we've seen the last few years when Purdue and Marquette play each other. And then Auburn, different Auburn team than last year. They lost a lot. They lost their head coach, but they hired Bruce Pearl's son, and Purdue put a whipping on them on Saturday down in Indianapolis by 28 points. Trey Kaufman-Renn said he wanted to beat the team by 50. Um, Now, I wasn't there, so the natural follow-up question, well, why? Just because they spanked Purdue last year down in Birmingham, and they did. And Purdue had to fight just to make it a 20-point game last year. But there's another team that's coming up on Trey Kaufman-Renn's schedule, because I remember this distinctly um, last year. Purdue went to Michigan last year, got beat. Trey picked up a lot of fouls in that game. Didn't feel like maybe he got a fair whistle. And then they played again in the Big Ten tournament. And uh, Trey was disappointed that Purdue did not A, win the game, and B, make the game closer. And Michigan kind of controlled them. And I remember in the post game press conference, Trey was very um, focused on wanting to play Michigan again. Um, he didn't get that opportunity, um, but we'll get that opportunity this year. So when Michigan and Purdue play this year, Mackey Arena, I think Trey Kaufman-Renn is going to be kind of cut in, as Gene Katie liked to say back in the day. But anyway, Purdue handled Auburn. And the big takeaway from that game is this: Purdue made um, 12 3-pointers, I believe, and none of them came from Fletcher Lawyer. The combination of Jakari Harris and CJ Cox and Jack Benner kind of carried the 3-point line on that night. And that's kind of a signal to the rest of the Big Ten, the rest of the country, that Purdue has the depth, and they're going to need nights like that from those players. And the stars on Purdue will be stars, but the depth and the contributions from the rest of the supporting cast, or however you want to phrase it, is going to be big as Purdue gets through the Big Ten season and then into the NCAA tournament. I mean, that, to me, that's a very positive sign for Purdue. Not that it hadn't been there, but for it to come out on that stage in that situation, neutral court game, even though it was heavily Purdue, a heavy Purdue crowd, which you'll find in the NCAA tournament in the first couple rounds, because Purdue likely plays close to home. In this case, it'd be St. Louis. If they would get out of St. Louis, they would go to Chicago. In each of those venues, Purdue's going to have a majority of the fans. It's the way it is. It's the way it's going to be. Um, or if there's another location nearby, Purdue will have that. Uh, but that's the kind of setting that you're going to see in the NCAA tournament, where Purdue's going to have a majority of the fans. But the point is that Venter and Harris and Cox really delivered um, in that game for Purdue to comfortably win that. And Auburn couldn't um, you know deal with Purdue's physicality, and they doubled them up in points in the paint, um, out rebounded them. I think Braden Smith had more assists than Auburn's team. Um, so it was a good way to go into the break. Now they come back after Christmas on Monday night, December the 29th, and they'll host Kent State, which last, uh, I believe, the last non-conference game of the season. Kind of a good game to come off break. These are by design, by the way. Just like the game against Eastern Illinois after Thanksgiving was by design. The game against Kent State was put there for a reason. And, you know, Purdue knock off some rust, being off as long as they were. But they and then it's back in the Big Ten play. I think they're going to start at Wisconsin the week from Saturday to get Big Ten play going again. They're 2-0, beat Minnesota at home, and they won at Rutgers. But 18 Big Ten games left. This is I think the Big Ten's very top heavy with Michigan and Purdue. Michigan State's right up there. Nebraska's having a fantastic year up to this point, and we'll see once Big Ten play really starts. They have the nation's longest winning streak. Nebraska does. When you factor in how they finished last year and what they're off to this year, I think the game for them to circle is coming up. I believe it's against Michigan State in Lincoln, the first weekend in January, to kind of get a gauge of kind of where they're at and what they could potentially do. So, I mean, you got to include them in the mix a little bit here. As we get, a little bit deeper in the Big Ten season, things will separate. But you got Purdue, you got Michigan State right up there. Michigan, can Illinois make a move into that direction? And then even though those four West Coast teams are in the Big Ten, you really lose sight of them in a way. UCLA and USC are going to be right there. So it'll be a fantastic Big Ten race again, I believe. But I do think it's top heavy as far as elite teams are concerned, and the Michigan State, Purdue, those three teams are more than capable of getting the Final Four, more than capable of winning the national championship. Even though we have some really good teams in the country this year, I think the Big Ten's poised to make a strong run. But anyway, with Purdue, they seem to have settled into roles. They've seemed to settle into their, what it's going to be type of thing. Matt Painter hasn't really messed with the starting lineup at all. The rotations are what they are. Some guys might get more minutes one night as opposed to the next, and um, so, but the contributions are going to keep coming, I think. And again, your Fletcher Lawyers, your Trey Kaufman Renz, and Braden Smiths are still going to be there. But when Fletcher Loyal goes 0 for 7 from 3-point range, you've got other guys stepping up and taking over and extending the leads and getting you into a comfortable position. But the Big Ten for Purdue will come down to the basics, things that they've harped on all year, things that they've harped on the last few years, rebounding, and they've become a very, very strong rebounding team. And that was the mission in the offseason to get Oscar Clough. And they've limited their turnovers. They're not giving away possessions with high number turnover games. But again, Big Ten play is different, and you don't know until you get into it. But their first Big Ten game after the break, at Wisconsin, and Wisconsin's not having what we would call a typical Wisconsin year, but you got to go on the road. It's a Saturday night game, national TV. The place will be hyped, even though the students won't be there as far as break is concerned. But I'm sure those that live in Madison or the Madison area will will come. So, you're going to get you're going to get you're going to get going here from a basketball standpoint. You're going to get a lot of serious games coming up in the Big Ten, and it's just a matter of how Purdue can handle those. Um, they have the experience, they have the talent, they have the depth, they have all the ingredients to win this Big Ten title, and I expect them to be right there uh, until the very end. You know, they only played like one game in a couple weeks, so that Monday night game against Kent State might take a little bit to get into, just based on the lack of game activity um, that this team has had. But it might be a little bit like Minnesota, where there were some struggles early, but then once the rust got knocked off, they took off. I don't know if it'll be that dramatic, but I would look for maybe some slow parts in the beginning, but then things get picked up after that. So men's basketball is in great shape as they get ready to go again in the Big Ten season coming up right after the first of the year. Women's basketball, they're done with non-conference play. They have played one Big Ten game, and Purdue played Michigan back in early December and just got crushed, 104-58. Michigan's really good. Purdue's not at that level. Um, it, and Purdue hasn't been at that level for a long time. But for the women, they've taken care of business at home. They've beaten non-conference competition at home, lesser non-conference competition than what they'll face in the Big Ten. They're winning. They won 8 games by an average of about 30 points. Um, how much does that translate to Big Ten play? Not all of it will. It's just simple fact that it won't. Most of their games have been over by halftime. Um, really, they've had 2 stressful games, and both were on the road, and they lost both of them. The one at Purdue Fort Wayne on a last second shot, and then blew a 16-point lead at Central Michigan and lost that game. Every other game has been kind of a lopsided affair. Um, you'd like you would have liked to see them get challenged a little bit more because that's what the Big Ten is going to be. And these 2 home games coming up are I think um, pivotal games for Purdue in this program. Um, last year was not a good year in the Big Ten. They were 0-10 to start the Big Ten year. They finished 3-15, did not make the Big Ten tournament. They need to make the Big Ten tournament this year. Um, and the other thing about this year's team, they've not been very good on the road. They're 0-4 on the road, losing to Michigan, Central Michigan, Purdue Fort Wayne, and Kentucky. They've performed well at home, again, against lesser competition, but they're going to have to figure out a way to protect their home court um, as of now. Can they beat Illinois and Ohio State at home? They can, um, but it will take a pretty high effort, pretty high execution to do that. Um, it's hard to say how many Big Ten teams have actually challenged themselves in the non-conference when you start looking at records and who teams have played. Um, your UCLA's and USC's of the world. They played some tough competition in the non-conference. Iowa has, Michigan has. Um, Purdue played at Kentucky, um, a game they didn't want to play. They tried to get out of that game, and they lost by 41. But the reason these 2 games coming up are so big is because they are home games. You have played well at home, and that needs to translate into what you do against Illinois and Ohio State. Um, it just has to. Um, you know, if you if Purdue loses these 2 games at home and they're double digit losses and they're not really into it as far as staying connected to those teams, then I think you're looking at another long Big Ten season. because they just haven't proven themselves on the road, and you're going to play half your games on the road in the Big Ten. But if they are competitive, um, show signs of life, then maybe you hold out for some hope that, or you're optimistic that maybe they can climb out of the Big Ten basement. But they're going to have to protect their home court to do that. Um, if it was just as simple as winning your home games and see what happens on the road, then Purdue would be in the middle of the Big Ten because they'd be 500. But that's not going to happen. I mean, there's just some games on the schedule that they're just not going to win. You know, USC, UCLA. Those are two road games. Um, they got to go to Nebraska here right after the first of the year. Nebraska's undefeated. Seems to be very efficient offensively. But again, how much have they been challenged in the non-conference? And they got to go to Wisconsin, which is a game they need to win. But the fact that it's on the road, Wisconsin's already beaten Michigan State at home, doesn't really give a lot of confidence that they can go to Madison and win that game. Um, they're going to need some players to really step up and perform at a high level. I think the two players that have done well consistently so far, you'd have to look at Tara Day and Kiki Smith, giving them a punch on the offensive end. Uh, Tara Day is a very athletic player, seems to have success with the ball in her hands. She can put the ball on the floor and get to the rim. They were playing her at point guard earlier in the year. They've moved her off the ball a little bit to let her kind of create a little on some plays. She's a strong rebounder as well. Um, so that's a positive because in some Big Ten games she's going to be a hard matchup for teams because they may not have that kind of athletic ability to stay with her. And Kiki Smith has become she came in as a 3-point shooter, shot over 40% last year uh, in conference play for Arkansas in the SEC. Uh, in her last game at Purdue, again against lesser competition, she was 5 for 5 from the field, 3 for 3 from 3-point line, and then 7 for 7 from the line. About as perfect as you can get. But Day and Smith have really kind of led the way offensively. They need more out of Madison Layden, and that's that's Madison's kind of not that type of player. Um, but they need her to be more aggressive. They need her to be looking for her shot more. They don't need her to defer. She's very good as far as being on the floor and knowing where the ball needs to go. And she's a good facilitator. She knows kind of the offense and how it should work and where people should be. She's very good at that, but they also need her to score. They really do. Because if Day and Smith score, who's next in line to score with them? The post players, um, they're strong, physically strong. They do rebound well, but I don't know if they're getting enough offensively from them. Now, it's all about who has the ball in their hands. This is the way you draw it up. But they need to have a strong inside presence, not only from an offensive standpoint, but defensively and rebounding. And the one thing Purdue has done well, the women, is um, they've cleaned up defensive rebounds. They have one of the top defensive rebounding percentages in the country. They're limiting teams' offensive rebounds and second chance opportunities, and that has to maintain. Purdue can't be giving up cheap second chance points in Big Ten play. The margin for error for this team, as it's been all years, is pretty small. And once you get in the Big Ten, it tightens up even more for them. But these two home games really, I don't want to say, well, they will define the Big Ten season for them. I don't want to go all in on that yet, but I think it's pretty close. Um, at worst they have to split, and that would give them a win over somebody they didn't beat last year. Um, so at worst they need to split. Ideally, you win two. It'll be difficult to win two. Illinois, um, is having a good year. Illinois smoked them pretty well last year over in Illinois. Ohio State's very athletic. Ohio State was under the radar a little bit at the beginning of the year, but it'll be very difficult. Two games for Purdue under Katie Gerald's. Purdue has played Ohio State for the most part pretty well, especially at home. Um, and maybe that'll be in their favor a little bit come on New Year's Eve. But two big games for the women really to give themselves some confidence, um, and just send a message that this is not going to be like last year. At some point, this program has to push forward, and it it hasn't done it the last few years. Purdue was in the NCAA tournament when Katie was here earlier. They got to the play-in game. Got beat by St. John's over at Ohio State, and then the next year they're in postseason NIT and postseason NIT again. But haven't made a postseason tournament, and now not making the Big Ten tournament. So this thing needs to turn in the direction of being able to play in postseason tournaments, whether it's Big Ten or NCAA or non-NCAA tournament. And that was, to me, that was the desired goal at the beginning of the year. Do well in the non-conference, which they did well, but not well enough. They need to be 10-1 in the non-conference, in my opinion. And then stay around 500 once you got in the Big Ten season, and then maybe get an invite to a non-NCAA tournament, postseason tournament. That would, to me, those would be steps forward for this program. But they lost two games in the non-conference they should not have lost. It's kind of put them behind the eight ball a little bit, because we can go down the list of Big Ten teams they're not going to win. They're not going to beat. Now, those other games you get, which puts a little bit more pressure on you to win those games. But anyway, I think these are two very important games for this team and this program this year. And again, they're going to come off a bit of a break. They haven't, but most Big Ten teams are coming off a break. Most of them are done with non-conference. There may be a stray non-conference game, a national type game coming up in the Big Ten, but Purdue's done with it, and they need to get off to a good start in the Big Ten and kind of get the ball rolling in their favor. And there's going to be a lot of interest and intrigue of what happens in these first two games. From a football standpoint, no surprise that Barry Odom's made some changes on the coaching staff. Defensive coordinator Mike Shears no longer with the program. He's being replaced by Kevin Kane, who was Ryan Walters' defensive coordinator. And I know there's some angst about bringing Kane back when you look at the numbers of the 2024 defense, which he was technically the defensive coordinator. I don't put that all on Kevin Kane because he's running Ryan Walters' defense, which was, to me, the scheme and everything else was abysmal. You lined up your best player in Benton County most of the time. But I do think Kane kind of took over play calling on the defense after Ryan Walters, started playing offensive coordinator after he fired Graham Harrell. So Kane probably had a little bit more responsibility, but I think he was running Ryan Walters' defense. He wasn't running his own. Now the question is, will he run his own defense, or is this going to be Barry Odom's defense with Kevin Kane playing a leading role as far as the play calling part of it? How much is Odom involved? And again, is this going to be Odom's defense? How much will Kane be able to inject into that and with the ideas and all that? These are things that we don't get to know. We don't get to know a lot of this stuff that helps us form an opinion whether Kevin Kane is a right hire or not. From the outside, it would seem to be, why do you go back to a guy that was in charge of your defense for the most part, not all season, but for the most part, that um, had, historic lows and all that kind of stuff. Um, so, you got to deal with that part of it. Um, and not everything falls on the coach. And, you got to have players. I mean, you just have to have better players, but you also have to have a good scheme and a good system, and you got to have people buy into it. Um, so that's going to be the kind of the one thing right now that's going to get talked about and discussed in the off season is, the assistant coach hires and where Kevin Kane fits in all this, and how's it going to look? How's it going to come together? Um, so that's that'll be probably the number one thing in the off season outside of player acquisitions from the portal and people and players leaving and staying and going and all that kind of stuff, and who they bring in from the portal. The portal officially opens January 2nd. There's been 10, 11 players that have kind of officially announced that they plan to go in the portal, but they probably there's probably some discussions with Purdue as far as staying and um, those type of things. Um, so it's not all just because someone said they're going in the portal doesn't mean that they will stay in the portal. Doesn't mean they won't come back to Purdue. Um, so there's just a lot of probably negotiations going on right now and all that kind of stuff from a player standpoint. Uh, Odom also elevated Bilal Marshall, who used to be a receiver at Purdue, to receivers coach. He was an analyst last year, so he'll get a full-time receivers assistant coaching job in charge of receivers. Um, Crabtree is the new offensive line coach. Zach Crabtree, I believe that's his name, and he'll he takes the place of Vance Weiss, who was fired. So we'll see how that works out. Don't know for sure if there's going to be any more changes on the coaching staff. You would think that they would have done that all in as far as new faces and all that kind of stuff. Um, there might be some behind the scenes analyst and um, recruiting personnel type thing that get changed out. People leave or they move in a different direction um, and see what changes could be made there. But um, yeah, I mean when you're 2-10, standing pat's probably not the best idea. And Odom needs it's not a make or break year because it is the second year. But again, Purdue fired Ryan Walters after 2 years. Um, so anything is possible and everything's on the table as far. But I think the program right now is in better shape. They're more organized. Um, they have a different look and feel about them. But again, it comes down to wins and how you look. And this team looked better than last year's team. It won one more game, um, but it still looked better. It has a different vibe about it, a different feel about it. But again, it's a results based business, and you've got to continue to produce results. Schedule does them no favors. We still don't know the order of Big Ten games. We know the opponents, but we don't know the order of the Big Ten games. I imagine those will come out after the first of the year. Other than I'm pretty sure the Indiana game will be the last game of the year. The question is it Friday night again? Does NBC want that game again, or does it get shuffled into the Saturday uh, rotation? Um, a lot of it may depend how Indiana finishes off the college football playoff and what kind of who's coming back for them. But that I don't think anybody's heard any differently that they would be changing rivalry weekend from the Big Ten standpoint. So the one game we probably know when it's going to be played, maybe not the date, but the weekend would be Indiana and Purdue in the last game of the regular season. Everything else is kind of, it's just kind of scattered. You don't know exactly how the sequence of games is going to play out, and that's key. Purdue will play at UCLA, but when, um, don't know that yet. The one thing I hope they eliminate from Purdue's standpoint and IU as well, no off week before the bucket game. And last year was abnormal because you had two off weeks based on the calendar. But let's just stick with one off week and not make it week before the Bucky game. Purdue was always having a bad year from a record standpoint, and then you take that week off, and it's like football ended. It's like the season ended. I mean, there was no buzz about it. Um, you took a week off, and then you got back at it at Thanksgiving, and it just didn't seem right, didn't feel right to do it that way. And Iowa and Nebraska played on that Friday. They didn't need a week off um, to do that. Part of it might have been Purdue was at Washington, so they kind of designed it to help with the travel and all that. I don't know. I'm kind of spitballing here, but bottom line is I don't think either team needs a week off. Just play, put your bye somewhere else, and then go from there. But the sequence of games will come out, and we'll see how the Big Ten schedule uh, plays out. Um, that's about it. In case you missed, I mean, Dave Shondell signed a contract extension, something that he wanted, and Michael Binsky was willing to give. I mean, they had a fantastic year based on the players that they lost and who they brought in, and took it to the regional finals to get beat by Pitt. Um, and Texas A&M, which won the national championship, proves that you don't need to be a number one seed in the volleyball to win it. And that's probably good news for Purdue. That's something to strive for because, um, you know, as of right now, Purdue's probably not going to be in a position to be a number one seed. So you look at a team like Texas A&M, who came together at the right time and ran through the tournament, winning at Nebraska, then beating Kentucky in the national championship. So you can come from outside the top teams to do that in volleyball, and maybe that gives Purdue a path that they could potentially do that. But now their expectations were not high for volleyball this past year, not as high as they have been, still high, but not at the upper level. But now that you did what you did this year, you're bringing back a lot of players. You're probably going to add a few through the portal, and you have a freshman class, I think, that's ranked in the top 25 based on one of the recruiting rankings. Um, you know, the expectations are back to where they were. Um, they won't be picked seventh in the Big Ten. They'll probably be picked in the top five. And now, now that you've proven what you proved this year, you got to do it with a lot more attention on you going into to next season. All right. Well, Merry Christmas, and hopefully we can um, put one of these together after next week. I kind of like to wait till after the women play Ohio State on New Year's Eve, and then the men will be going to Wisconsin on that Saturday. So I may wait till you know the first of the year, January 1st or something, to do another one of these has been podcasts, assuming anybody's paying attention, other than my cat. Um, so anyway, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We don't come back before the end of 2025, and should be a good year starting in 2026 for everybody involved. And it's been a good year for the Bears. I'll just say that. The Indiana Bears are doing well right now, so we're very happy about that. All righty. Well, have a good day. And again, thanks for stopping by. and we'll do this another time. Thank you.